Henry, thank you for sitting down and talking with us. And you and I have had a personal relationship that's gone on for some time now. We have a lot of things in common, whether it be golfing or jogging or riding around on your Vesper when it cranks up properly.
When I put gas in it, right?
Yeah. And we will not disclose the infamous picture of you coming on a Harley Davidson motorcycle. And but anyway, some great memories that we've got together. One of the things that I've appreciated about you is what a great coach you've been to me and that you've been to our leadership team at Chick-fil-A. When you think about coaching and coaching leaders, I know that you kind of have a process in mind that you use as you coach, because all leaders want to be more effective coaches. Yeah. So how do you approach that?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is kind of almost out of the laws of physics, that if you think of here's a technical term, the second law of thermodynamics is a physics term, which says that over time, everything loses energy and runs down and gets more and more chaotic and more disordered, left unto itself. See, that law of entropy only applies to a closed system. Now, you can reverse that when the system opens up to two outside factors. One is a new source of energy speaking into that system, and the second is some sort of template or principles to organize that energy. And so when leaders are working with their people, they've got to really keep those two things in mind, that they want to, if you're trying to help Joe develop or Susie develop, you want to look at Joe and Susie as a system, just, one of them, the system of their own head and heart, and you want to make sure that that's opening up to outside energy sources, yourself included, but outside energy sources, but also templates and principles and training that organize that energy. So I always think about, no matter what it looks like, I want to make sure a leader is not a closed system unto themselves, and that they're opening up to those two factors over time, and they'll get better.
Yeah. One of the challenges that we have in business today is the environment, the context is changing so rapidly that if we don't have that openness, brands lose their sense of relevancy with their environment over time. So that constant, perpetual reinventing to maintain that sense of relevancy is critical.
It's unbelievable. I told a story this morning about my daughter, who's 12, and I was explaining to her about this. These guys, the power team, they go into schools and churches and
lift weights
and talk about
demonstrations,
values and all that. Well, I said, Olivia, these guys can pick your teacher up and lift them over their heads. I said, they can take a block of ice and punch it and break it in half, and they can take a phone book and just rip it in half. And she looks at me and she goes, Dad, what's a phone book? She's 12 years old.
Yeah.
Did not know what it was.
Yeah.
And I have seen companies that, they're not changing.
They still got the phone book.
And they think the people that they are serving and their customers and their employees still use phone books. And sometimes I'll tell the rest of that story, where the next day I was at JFK Airport and I'm talking to this lady. I said, what brings you to New York? She said, well, I'm in the phone book business. I said, you should talk to my daughter.
Oh, my goodness.
Because sometimes, we're not changing, and we have to.
Henry, tell us about boundaries for leaders. This is one of your latest ideas, but share with us, what's the principle, the ethos of that book?
Well, the basic premise is this. Basically, if you think about it, leaders all in some ways do the same things. They define a future that they're trying to get to, a goal or a vision. They engage talent to try to move them. They have to execute that in some way, and then they measure it, and then they hold people accountable, and then they try to fix what they find. But even though they're all out there doing that, some leaders get great results and some don't. And a lot of that has to do with the boundaries or the structures that leaders are setting to make sure that the people are able to move down that path. And there's a handful of them that become very, very important. And the neuroscience behind this, what we know about the brain now is actually explaining why some business leaders get results and others don't, because they're leading in ways that their people's brains can follow them. One more important principle in there, the book starts out with kind of a wake-up call. And it was a conversation I had with the CEO, and he was describing some things going on in the culture of his company and the teams. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, because, the guy that heads that up, I brought him in from, so I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, the way that business evolved, and he kept giving me these answers, and I kept saying, well, why is that? And finally he looked up and he goes, I guess when you think about it, I am ridiculously in charge, aren't I? And that's the wake-up moment, that when a leader figures out, whether you lead a small team or a department or a business unit or an entire, company, that whatever you are the steward over, the results that you're finding in the culture, on the teams, in the numbers, you, as the leader, you're either doing something to create that or you're doing something that's allowing it. And so I try to get leaders to have the first wake-up call is to own what part of this are you either creating or allowing by your leadership style. And that's where Boundaries for Leaders really begins.
Yeah. That truth hit home to me in a book that I read by Philip Crosby, Quality is Free. This is back in the 1980s. And it tells the story of a guy that runs a hotel, and he basically comes to the conclusion that what's in that hotel is a reflection of himself. All the errors, the issues really were the extension of the way he was modeling and his own personal behaviors. And so he looks in the mirror and realizes that's the answer to all my problems that I'm looking at right there. And that's a eureka moment as a leader if we can come to that point.
That's exactly right. And we talk a lot about self-leadership, as a term in the literature. But when you think about it, that's so important because, if you're at various levels in an organization, the higher you get in leadership, the less somebody's really watching over you hour by hour, right? And the more freedom you get. I mean, if you're the CEO, you've got a board and you have shareholders that have big policy boundaries and directions, but nobody's like over your shoulder watching how you do that every day. And so since the leader, the higher you get, the more autonomy you have to ask the question, who's leading the leader? And ultimately, who's leading the leader is going to be reality, because reality will ultimately talk to a leader about the fruits of their leadership. So back to this closed system idea. One of the things that I think is very important in coaching leaders is to make sure that they're having the proper relationships with their leader, which is reality, and that they have a relationship with reality. And so many leaders get insulated from the realities that would force them to make the shifts and changes and look in the mirror. And so I think it's a great insight what he said and the way he said it. You just have to ask, what's going to be the mirror? Yeah. How am I going to get reality talking to me?
Yeah, that's why we have to have truth tellers.
Truth tellers,
in our life that are very direct, very open. And I know within Chick-fil-A, I've got 2 or 3 people that are kind of my go-to truth tellers that are kind of deep into the organization that I'm so comfortable with. I'm willing to really listen to what they have to say and know that if I get called on the carpet,
right,
I've got to own up to what's there.
Well, because ultimately it's your friend.
Yeah.
There's a proverb that says, the wounds of a friend are better than the kisses of an enemy. And if leaders don't have those few friends that love them enough to wound them, then they're going to be in trouble. They want to find out that way instead of the hard way.
Henry, all the visits that we're having with different leaders here, we're asking this question about success. And there are many thoughts about success, and all of us have different perspectives that where we've seen success. How do you define success for you personally?
Dan, I didn't know the profundity of it at the time, but remember in your high school yearbook how you got to find like a life saying or something? And I came across a verse in the Bible, and it basically says, what God has said to everybody that they're supposed to be doing. This is what success is. He said, it's been shown to you what you're supposed to do. And it was 3 things. It was to love mercy, to do justice, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, I didn't know it at that time, but those orienting structures of when you're trying to develop in ways, mercy really has to do with understanding the needs of others and being able to empathize and show compassion and put yourself in their shoes and treat them like you would want to be treated. All of those derivatives of mercy. And to do justice means to be finding, what's right and trying to execute that in whatever setting you're in, who needs to be stood up to or who needs to be told the truth or what's fair. And when you put love and fairness and love and trying to do the right thing together, because a lot of times we'll do one without the other, we'll drive home what's right but won't be loving, or we'll be loving and won't stand up. When you put those together, and then you're doing it in a humble way where you realize, gosh, I'm not God, I need answers, I need help, I screw it up, I need forgiveness. You put all those three together, and I think what happens is that you find your purpose, you find an anchor in kind of what am I trying to do in each situation. And what I find is when people are on a path like that, at least for me, then success ends up being that you as a person are being fruitful in a meaningful purpose in the way that you were designed to be. And I think it takes all three of those to do that. So I think the end result of success is that you end up being fruitful in the purpose that God has made you for.
Yeah. Well, my life has been enriched by your teaching. I want to thank you for being such a great learner and studying so that you can impart great truth. And I want to thank you for being such a great coach for me.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.